Your need for control is ruining your life, not in dramatic explosions, but in quiet, invisible ways. In the tension that never leaves your chest, in the arguments that always circle back to the same point, in the exhaustion of trying to hold together things that were never in your hands to begin with. You tell yourself it's responsibility. You tell yourself it's ambition. But deep down, you know it's fear. Fear of what happens when you finally let go. The brutal truth? Control doesn't protect you. It strangles you. And the more you grip, the less life you actually hold. Which is why we need to ask, what is control really costing you? Because the very thing you believe keeps you safe is the same thing keeping you small. And that illusion is exactly where we need to begin. Control seduces us because it feels like safety. The harder you cling, the more it seems like chaos can't touch you. If every plan is perfect, if every detail is managed, if every person behaves the way you expect, then maybe nothing can fall apart. On the surface, it makes sense. Life is unpredictable. So we armor ourselves with schedules, checklists, rules, even relationships where we try to script every outcome. But here's the paradox. The more you control, the less alive you feel. Because life doesn't unfold by your script. It breathes, it shifts, it surprises. And every attempt to cage it leaves you more anxious, not less. The Stoic philosopher Epictetus warned about this 2,000 years ago. He said, "Some things are up to us, and some things are not." His point was simple but devastating. The more energy you waste trying to control what was never yours, other people's opinions, outcomes, the future, the more miserable you become. Modern psychology backs this up. Studies on anxiety show that people with a high need for control actually report greater stress, higher burnout, and poorer relationships. Why? Because the world doesn't obey your grip. And when it inevitably resists, you tighten harder, creating the very chaos you tried to avoid. You've seen this in your own life. The micromanaged relationship that suffocated until it broke. The job where perfectionism left you drained, rewriting the same email 10 times. The friendships that grew distant because people felt like projects, not people. And here's the part we rarely admit. Your need for control isn't just exhausting you. It's quietly stealing the life you're meant to live. And to understand why, we need to look at the wound beneath it. The fear that fuels your grip. Fear doesn't just live in your thoughts, it's wired into your brain. And one of the brain's oldest drives is prediction, the urge to know what comes next. Why? Because for most of human history, uncertainty meant danger. If you could predict where the predators were, or when the food would run out, you survived. If you couldn't, you didn't. That survival wiring never left us. Now, every time you plan, organize, or anticipate, your brain rewards you with dopamine, the same chemical that fuels habits, cravings, even addictions. The brain whispers, "Good job, you're safe." And that whisper feels so comforting that you start chasing it again and again. This is why you refresh your inbox, even when you checked it a minute ago. Why you feel restless until every detail of a trip is mapped out. Why a delayed text can make your stomach twist. It's not overthinking. It's your brain craving the hit of certainty. But here's the trap. Neuroscience shows that when control slips, when plans change, when outcomes surprise you, your body reacts as if you're under attack. Cortisol, the stress hormone, floods your system. Your heart races, muscles tense. Your brain goes on high alert, scanning for threats that may not even exist. It doesn't matter if it's something serious, like losing a job, or something small, like the Wi-Fi going down before a meeting. To your nervous system, unpredictability equals danger. A study out of UCLA found that people with a high need for control don't just feel more anxious, their bodies show it. Higher cortisol levels, restless sleep, even weakened immune responses. The more tightly they grip, the more fragile they actually become. This is the paradox of control at the biological level. In other words, the more you chase certainty, the more your brain rewards you, until reality resists. Then the same circuit floods you with stress. First reward, then rupture, then alarm. That loop doesn't bring peace, it trains vigilance. You've lived this cycle. The panic when plans suddenly change. The phantom vibration of your phone, convincing you someone needs you when no one does. The exhaustion of micromanaging every detail, only to realize you feel less safe, not more. So what starts as a survival instinct ends as a prison. Control promises peace, but it delivers vigilance. It keeps your body in a state of permanent alert, as though life is always one step away from falling apart. And this brings us to the deeper truth. Control isn't just a habit. It's a stress loop wired into your biology, which means that the longer you grip, the less peace you'll ever find. Which is why control doesn't just steal your inner peace. It seeps into your relationships too. Carl Jung described this as projection, the tendency to disown parts of ourselves and then try to manage or suppress them in others. The anger you refuse to admit in yourself becomes criticism of someone else's temper. The insecurity you bury turns into demands for constant reassurance. What you can't face inside, you try to control outside. Jung went further. He warned that this pattern blocks individuation, the process of becoming whole. When you spend your energy controlling others, you're really avoiding the work of integrating your own shadow, the hidden parts of yourself you'd rather not see. As Jung put it, everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. Think about how this plays out. The partner who insists, "Text me when you get there." On the surface, it sounds like care, but underneath, it's control wearing the mask of concern, a fear of abandonment they haven't acknowledged in themselves. And tragically, what was meant to bring closeness slowly suffocates it instead. Of course, care matters, but when care becomes compulsion, closeness turns into compliance, and the relationship starts to breathe less. Or consider the friend who dictates every plan, not because they love structure, but because uncertainty terrifies them. The jealousy that rises when someone doesn't reply fast enough, a mirror of your own fear of being insignificant. On the surface, it looks like love. I just want to know you're safe. I'm only trying to make sure everyone's happy. But beneath the surface, it's not love. It's fear disguised as love. And fear suffocates intimacy. Because the more you try to manage, the less space the other person has to breathe. And intimacy cannot survive without freedom. Jung saw this dynamic clearly. The tighter you grip others, the more you reveal the grip you've lost on yourself. And until you face that shadow directly, you will keep projecting it outward, demanding from others what you've refused to claim within. Modern psychology confirms this. Studies on controlling behaviors in relationships show that they consistently predict lower satisfaction, weaker intimacy, and higher conflict. Not because love isn't present, but because love collapses under constant surveillance. And here's the brutal irony. Control pretends to protect your relationships, but in reality, it erodes the very thing you're desperate to keep. And this is where the lens has to widen, because control isn't just a psychological habit or a behavioral pattern. Every wisdom tradition across history has pointed to the same truth. Clinging always leads to suffering. And control doesn't just weigh on your mind or your relationships. It corrodes the soul. Take Buddhism. The Buddha taught that the root of suffering, dukkha, is attachment. The more you cling to people, possessions, or outcomes as if they must stay fixed, the more you guarantee pain. Why? Because life is impermanent. People change. Circumstances shift. Nothing stays exactly the same. And yet, the controlling mind says, if I can just hold this still, I'll be safe. But safety built on permanence is an illusion, because permanence doesn't exist. So control becomes a trap. The harder you grip, the more suffering you create for yourself. Taoism offers the same warning in a different language. The Tao Te Ching describes Wu Wei, effortless action, living in harmony with the flow of life. Imagine a river. You can thrash against the current, exhausting yourself, demanding that the water obey you. Or you can learn to move with it, conserving your strength and arriving where you're meant to go. Control is the thrashing, flow is the surrender. And Lao Tzu's wisdom is clear. When you try to force life into your script, you cut yourself off from the natural harmony that makes life feel alive. Christianity echoes the same truth. In the book of Matthew, Jesus asks, "Who of you by worrying can add a single hour to your life?" It's a piercing question. All of your anxious planning, your sleepless nights, your desperate grip, none of it actually extends your life. Instead, it steals the hours you already have. Worry and control are not faith. They are the refusal of faith. They say, "I trust only myself," but that self is finite, fragile, and unable to hold everything together. And here's the modern tragedy. Even spirituality can be twisted into control. People obsessively repeat rituals, not out of devotion, but out of fear. If I do this prayer exactly right, nothing bad will happen. If I light this candle the wrong way, I'll be punished. What was meant to be surrender becomes superstition. What was meant to bring peace becomes another cage. The lesson across all traditions is the same. Control feels like strength, but it's not. It's fear disguised as strength. True strength is the opposite: surrender, letting go, trusting the flow of life, the impermanence of the moment, the larger order you can't command. Because when you release your grip, something shifts. You stop fighting the river. You stop bargaining with the future. You stop mistaking worry for responsibility. And that's when the paradox becomes clear. Control makes you weaker, but surrender makes you free. And yet, even as you hear this truth, another trap waits for you. Because sometimes control doesn't show up as force against others. It shows up as betrayal of yourself. Carl Jung warned of this danger when he described the persona, the mask you wear to meet the world. On the surface, the persona helps you function: the polished worker, the dependable friend, the agreeable partner. But when the mask hardens, it no longer protects you. It replaces you. You stop asking, "What do I want?" and start asking, "What keeps me acceptable?" This is where control turns inward. You begin managing every expression, every word, every gesture, not because it's true, but because it's safe. You edit yourself in real time, chasing approval like oxygen. Each curated post on Instagram, each carefully worded email at work, each smile that hides exhaustion becomes part of the same trade, sacrificing your truth to control how others see you. It looks harmless. It even gets rewarded. The agreeable coworker is praised for being a team player. The curated feed wins likes. The partner who always smooths things over is called easygoing. But deep down, you know the cost. Every time you mute your needs, every time you perform instead of reveal, you fade a little more. Jung put it plainly: the most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely. That's why so many avoid it. Instead of facing the raw self, we manage impressions. But here's the cruel twist. The more you control how others see you, the more invisible you become to yourself. Modern psychology echoes this. Studies on self-monitoring show that people who constantly adapt their image to fit social expectations report higher stress, lower authenticity, and more loneliness. Why? Because connection requires truth, and if you've abandoned yours, there's nothing left to connect to. And so control becomes a strange paradox. Outwardly, it looks like mastery. Inwardly, it's erasure. You become invisible in the chase to be acceptable. And this invisibility isn't just painful, it's unsustainable. Because when you abandon yourself long enough, the emptiness you're trying to escape eventually swallows you whole. Which is why we must turn to the next cost of control. How it doesn't just betray your relationships or your identity, but your entire well-being. Anxiety, burnout, and emptiness aren't random. They are the bill control always comes to collect. And here's the truth. That bill is always paid through your body, your mind, and your spirit. Think about the exhaustion you've carried lately. The restless nights where you replay conversations, rewriting what you should have said. The days where your to-do list grows faster than your energy to meet it. The constant hum in your chest that feels like tension never lets go. That's not random stress. That's the tax of control. Modern psychology is blunt about this. Perfectionism, one of the clearest forms of control, has been directly linked to depression, obsessive-compulsive patterns, and even suicidal ideation. Why? Because perfectionism tells you life will only love you if you get it all right. And since all right is impossible, the cycle never ends. You've seen this in everyday ways, hovering over send, tweaking punctuation again and again, convinced one wrong word will expose you, or the calendar packed so tightly there's no room to breathe, because an empty space feels like failure. The quiet panic when plans change, when traffic makes you late, when life doesn't obey your script. And notice what all of this creates. Not presence, but performance. You're not living the moment, you're managing it. You're not resting in who you are, you're rehearsing who you think you must be. Every day becomes a stage where the play never ends, and the actor never gets to step backstage. Burnout isn't just physical tiredness. It's the soul saying, I can't keep pretending. Anxiety isn't just worry. It's the alarm bell that rings when your grip has strangled your ability to flow with life. Emptiness isn't a mystery. It's what remains when you spend your energy on appearances instead of connection. The paradox is cruel. You chase control because you believe it will quiet your fear, but in reality, it multiplies the fear. You end up in exactly the place you were running from, fragile, tired, and unfulfilled. And this brings us to the turning point. If control breeds emptiness, then letting go, vulnerability, trust, surrender, might be the very thing that fills you. Letting go feels like the greatest risk, but in truth, it's the beginning of real strength. We think surrender is weakness, that if we admit, I don't know, if we allow ourselves to be seen in our fear or uncertainty, we'll lose control of everything. But here's the deeper truth. Surrender is not the absence of power. It is the redirection of power. Researcher Brené Brown has shown that connection doesn't grow when you look perfect, but when you let yourself be seen. Vulnerability isn't collapsing into helplessness. It's choosing honesty over performance. It's saying, here I am, flawed, uncertain, human, and still worthy of love and belonging. Viktor Frankl, who survived the horrors of the concentration camps, echoed this in his timeless insight. Everything can be taken from a man but one thing, the last of the human freedoms, to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances. That's surrender in its deepest sense. Not giving up, but giving over. Handing your energy away from what you can't control and toward the one thing you can, your response. Think about it in daily life. When you say, I don't know, instead of forcing an answer, you create room for honesty. When you admit fear instead of pretending to be invincible, you open the door for support. When you stop scripting every outcome of a conversation, you leave space for real intimacy to breathe. Each of these moments feels terrifying at first, but they're the cracks through which connection enters. Because people don't connect to your mask, they connect to your truth. Surrender, then, is not passivity, it is courage. The courage to trust life enough to meet it as it is, instead of bending it to your will. The courage to risk being seen, so that real belonging can finally find you. And that brings us to the final shift. If surrender is strength, then what does life look like when you stop clinging to control altogether? It looks like peace. Not the fragile peace you try to manufacture with rules and routines, but the kind of peace that arrives when you stop forcing life into your mold and let it move as it wants. This isn't passivity, it's presence. It's choosing to show up without needing to choreograph every outcome. We touched earlier on the Taoist idea of Wu Wei, effortless action, flowing instead of forcing. And here is where it becomes real, because when you let go of control, life doesn't collapse, it begins to flow. The conversation you once rehearsed word for word becomes genuine connection. The project you once micromanaged starts breathing with creativity. Even silence, once unbearable, begins to feel like rest. And here's what's surprising. The world doesn't fall apart when you stop gripping it. Instead, you begin to notice beauty in the very places your anxiety once overlooked. The way sunlight softens a room, the way laughter sounds when it isn't scheduled, the way someone's eyes light up when you're actually listening instead of planning your reply. This shift from control to presence is not abstract. It shows up in small, ordinary choices. Choosing to leave a day on your calendar unscheduled and discovering freedom in that space. Allowing a meal with friends to unfold without an agenda and finding the best conversations weren't planned. Saying, I don't know what tomorrow will bring, and realizing that uncertainty is not an enemy, but an open door. Modern psychology affirms this too. Research on mindfulness shows that when you release the compulsion to predict and control, stress decreases, empathy rises, and life satisfaction grows. It's not because problems vanish, it's because presence replaces pressure. And when you belong to yourself, something shifts in every direction. Friendships deepen because you're not hiding behind masks. Love becomes steadier because you're not begging someone else to carry your fear. Even your own reflection changes, because you finally meet yourself without judgment. The philosopher Michel de Montaigne said, "The greatest thing in the world is to know how to belong to oneself." That's the secret. Freedom doesn't come from mastering everything outside you. It comes from inhabiting yourself fully, right here, as you are. So the transformation is clear, from anxiety to peace, from rigidity to flow, from fear to trust, from performance to presence. And this is the refrain worth carrying. Life doesn't begin when you control it. Life begins when you let it breathe. Because when you finally loosen your grip, you discover something radical. You were never meant to hold it all together. You were meant to live it. Because in the end, control doesn't create safety. It creates chains. The peace you're searching for doesn't come from tightening your grip, but from learning to sit calmly in the storm, unshaken, steady, present. So let me ask you, where does your need for control weigh heaviest? In your work, in your relationships, or in the way you treat yourself? Share it in the comments. Your story may be the mirror someone else needs. And if this video made you feel understood, subscribe and turn on notifications. Here, you don't need to control anything to belong.